We had been walking in silence for another hour. The cloud cover had grown dark again, threatening to pour down on us at any moment. My body ached and relentlessly told me to stop, but I had grown used to the pain and simply ignored it. We couldn't afford to stop here. This trail was unfamiliar to me, and for all I knew, there could be hordes of manticores just around, waiting for us to rip us to shreds. Backlash, I think we should find cover. Brass said as he looked up at the sky. Looks like the weather could be getting bad soon. He watched as I simply shook my head and turned my gaze forward. I had been about to answer, when a loud crack filled the air from above, instinctively causing me to drop to the ground. And that's weird. If that was thunder, where was the flash? Brass pointed out sharply. The loud drone filled the air as an object punched through the cloud layer above us. It was an oddly shaped, off-white box. A pair of long cylinders ran along its underside that trailed smoke and green flames from various impact points on it. The flying box listed to the side and banked widely as an Enclave sky tank tore through the cloud hole the smoking box had made, its cannon letting out another roar as it fired. The white craft avoided the shot, a red beam appearing quickly between both vehicles before the sky tank erupted into flames and rolled over. The black Pegasi tank dipped down and disappeared over a hill as the other craft rolled and slammed to the hillside a couple of 100 feet away from Brass and I. "What the fuck was that?" Brass cried out. "Backlash! We should get the fuck out of here!" He was right. We should have run. But if we had run from Solemn, we would never have helped her. In running from Red Wing, we would never have helped them. In running from Isaac, I would never have helped him. No. We need to see if they need help. "Fuck that!" Brass screamed and flailed his forehooves at me. "What if they try to kill us? Or worse?" Brass glared at me. "What if they turn out to be like 42? Just the mention of her name brought my blood to a boil. "Then we'll fucking deal with them like we did with 42. I trotted forward towards the burning wreck, keeping low on the off chance that Brass was correct and it came out shooting. As I approached a small boulder, there was a loud bang. A rectangular section of the craft's hull shot out a few feet away and flopped to the ground. I scrambled behind the boulder, peeking out to read something that was written on the side of the white craft. Galileo. I turned my gaze back to the thick smoke pouring out of the hole. A muffled coughing preceded a dark green unicorn, stumbling out, gasping as he got a few feet from his exit point before looking over the tattered red shirt he wore, his horn glowing faintly as he levitated a small box to his muzzle. "Security officer's log," he choked out, squinting as he slowly scanned the horizon with his eyes. I ducked down before he could catch me in his peripheral vision. "I'm the only surviving member of the expeditionary team, having crash-landed after encountering a hostile craft. The main drive color and flight computer are damaged, as well as the communication systems." I decided to slowly raise my head up over the rock. The odd pony had now levitated a second box to him. This one was about the size of a saddlebag, looking at as he talked. "I will attempt to repair the communication systems once I can put the plasma fires out. Scanners say that the land is scoured with pockets of magical radiation, but they are low enough that I shouldn't need to administer any metahypos. I believe that my supplies can hold out long enough to get the emergency beacon up." A flash of darkness flickered on a rock from above me, pulling my attention up just quickly enough that I spotted a power-armored Pegasus drop down from in front of the old pony. Although I had seen a few suits of Enclave power armor, something told me that they normally didn't come in the color of dark gray. As the pony touched down, they lined up the twin pulse rifles attached to their side at the unicorn, who in response sat down and put his hooves in the air. "By charter of the Grand Pegasus Enclave, I order you to state your reasons for violating sovereign Enclave airspace." The mare in the power armor boomed loudly. I looked over to Brass, who had covered his ears with his hooves. "Yeah, not so much fun when you're on the receiving end." The odd pony does his best to stand up straight, his orange frizzy mane drooping to his eyes as he spoke. "I am Security Officer Proton of the UEF, and we are on a peaceful survey mission. We were unaware we had crossed into..." "Then you admit to a change of espionage against the Grand Pegasus Enclave." She cut him off. "You'll be placed under arrest and submit yourself to interrogation and trial." "Espionage?" He replied and got back to his hooves, using his magic to levitate a box he had talked about earlier. It was a routine. He didn't get any further than that before the pulse rifles fired, striking the odd pony in the chest. He glowed a bright pink for a moment before wisping away into ash in the breeze. She hoofed a button on her foreleg, rising it up to her helmet. "Command, this is Sergeant Granite. Incident report details that the incursion perpetrator fired upon and destroyed a sky tank. Upon apprehension, he admitted to espionage against the Enclave. In my attempt to detain him, he raised a weapon, and I responded with lethal force." I sighed out and decided that this wasn't a situation that I could help anyone out with, looking over to Brass and nodding my head for us to get out of here. He nodded and trotted forward quietly, as I attempted to do the same, tweaking as my stomach again as I misstepped. Freezing in my tracks, I threw up again. More of the yellow and crimson bile spilled onto the ground, as I knew I had just fucked us over. "You there! Freeze!" she boomed, jumping into the air effortlessly and slamming down next to us. "By charter of the Grand Pegasi Enclave, I order you to state your reasons for violating sovereign Enclave airspace." She leveled her twin pulse rifles at me. We were just passing through when we saw the thing crash." I smiled and put my hooves in the air. "We only thought we might be able to help them if they were injured." "You mean you wanted to help them, Backlash?" Brass remarked snidely as he raised his hooves as well. "Leave me out of it. Thanks for your support." "Enough!" Granite boomed. "If you were just passing through, how did you receive those injuries?" "When the pool exploded, ma'am." Brass spoke up, giving his best forced smile. "Barely made it out alive." I turned back to look at her, the bug-eyed lenses on the helmet making it impossible to read her in the silence that followed. "Well, you're crazy enough that I happen to believe you, seeing as no Earth pony would have known yet without being there." She pointed a hoof at me. "And if you are lying, then don't ever let me catch you above the cloud layer. Got it?" She spread her wings and took off towards the cloud layer, at a speed Skyline had always needed to push herself to reach. As she disappeared through it, I sighed and slumped as my racing heart could finally relax. "Well, that was interesting. Remind me never to let you get on her bad side," Brass said as he shrugged. "Let's find a place to bed down for the night." I nodded, and let out a little chuckle as I turned back towards the trail. It was certainly an odd day, but at least we are still alive. For now. I blinked again as we trotted down from the hillside that led to an open wasteland, my legs locking up as a wave of confusion hit me. I kept my balance just enough to not fall over, but not enough to look like I didn't know how my legs worked anymore. "Brass? What the hell just happened?" I spun around and looked down at him, reading as aggravation crept over his face. "We were just at the wreck of that one thing, so how did we get here?" I asked as I watched his eye tweak as Solemn's had. "Backlash?" Brass face-toothed as he sighed. Even his anger sounded hollow now. "That was yesterday. I've told you this twice so far today." He sat down and pointed at his hoof. "You messed up your head a lot worse than I think you did, in the blast from the pool, and it's been affecting your memory. On top of that, you've been having more hallucinations with those voices, and just walked away from them not 5 minutes ago." I rolled my eyes. "I'm so sorry I had to get blown." I stopped talking, as I saw he was mouthing exactly what I was saying. He gave a slight smirk as I frowned. "I've said this before, haven't I?" He ignored me and continued trotting forward. Before us lay the mostly flat plains that once sat under the impressive Pegasi city of Cloudsdale. Most importantly, we were now back on the road to Red Wing. Remarkably, as I recognized where we were, we had managed to shave off a few hours' worth of walking by cutting through the mountain path. Unfortunately for us, though, we came out in the most dangerous part of the road. I twisted myself around painfully, reaching to my saddlebags to grab the closest weapon on the top. I could gladly take out a manticore over what we would find out here. Brass, I need you to keep the lookout for a pack of feral ghouls. I groaned out as my side ached for me to stop stressing my body as I felt the suction of 42's revolver on my hoof. Skyline had always says, if you run into them along this path. Not to mention Longbow and I were lucky that Isaac led them off, and we could pick him up in the Marauder. Backlash. About yesterday morning, Brass started to say. Not now, Brass. We need to stay focused. We need to be completely quiet. Any noise, and we'll have ghouls all over us. I cut him off before hoofing the revolver into my muzzle. We only got lucky they didn't show up when we went to the pool. They had all probably taken shelter from the rain that day, but they will likely still be out here today. I can feel it. But you need to remember, he raised his voice, making me cringe. Shh! I spit out from around the grip of the gun, catching his empty gaze as he looked down at the ground. I understand that it might be important, but honestly, if it could wait until we were at least safe back with the others. So, we walked forward in silence, scooting from one point of cover to the next, the dark clouds finally releasing their rain slowly in a light drizzle. The sound of the rain made it particularly hard to hear any pony coming towards us, but I'm sure that we would be able to see them long before we could hear them anyway. As the dirt under our hooves turned to mud, I kept my eyes glued to the horizon. With any luck, Skyline would be driving the Marauder over it and rescue me like she always had. Whenever we got back to the garage, I was going to take the next month off. Brass was right. Once the Rangers are informed of Sherbert's plan, they would take care of her. There was no need for any of us to keep risking our lives anymore. Brass could finally go back to his real home, if they'd take him. If not, he was more than welcome to stay on with us. Carlotta could always continue to work for us as long as I could renegotiate her contract to a lower price. Considering I didn't look at it, and she probably is costing me a small fortune already. Longbow would probably like to go back to being a paladin for her original contingents, though I hope I can still stop by and see her. Just thinking about her brought a smile to my muzzle. Goddesses, this last month may have sucked, but it has been the most amazing month of my life due to the incredible ponies, griffins and cyber zebras notwithstanding, of course, I've gotten to know. But overall, the one pony I find myself missing the most is Skyline. Hell, I know she feels the same, but after everything I've put her through, I can't help but feel like she doesn't deserve me as a brother. You know that ain't true. The imaginary desk stallion spoke up again, this time apparently speaking out of an old, half-buried tire. You should know better, Mr. B. Miss Skyline wouldn't trade you for any pony in the entire wasteland. As he finished, I dropped my revolver from my muzzle as I stomped my good leg down in the mud. At that moment, I did something I knew I would regret. Can you just please be quiet? I screamed out, my voice carrying through the rain as both Brass and I froze in place. As my echo carried off into the distance, the constant noise of the light drizzle filled our ears. Maybe we got lucky again, and there were no ghouls around. A sharp scream filled the air from further down the plains, shortly accompanied by a whole chorus of growls, snarls, and howls. My legs acted on their own, pulling me straight into a gallop as panic gripped my brain. I turned my head and looked at the silver gun I had left in the mud, wanting to go back for it, but I wasn't in control of my body anymore. We had to find shelter. As we ran, I could see the shape of the fancy buck snack cake sky carriage Sky and I would rest in. It may be a bit cramped, but the reinforced walls from the refrigeration system had sheltered us before from ghoul attacks. I steered Brass over towards it, waiting until he had ducked inside before biting down on the handle of the heavy door. As I pulled it closed, I froze as I saw a group of ghouls that was chasing us. The goddess damned must have been near 100 of them, each one screaming and screeching as I could see their glowing eyes wavering as they galloped towards us. I yanked at the door, swinging it shut and giving a small sigh of relief as it latched. Sky and I have never been trapped by more than just a few, and even then we had our fears that the door wouldn't hold. If anything, at least it would buy us some time. So, Brass. I put my hoofs together and smiled nervously, trying to think of some way to get us out of this. I wanted to ask you if you were still interested in that date. I glanced over the door as I heard the pack thump into it. The whole sky carriage shook as they slammed into it. A few empty boxes were tossed off the shelves and scattered on the floor. I feel like you've earned it for all you've been through for me. Backlash, Brass calmly replied, barely loud enough to hear me. I can't. I just want to go home. Fine. We'll have it at your place. Whatever. I looked over to Brass, who was surprisingly calm. Just another reason the others at his base shouldn't have treated him the way they did. When we get out of here, I will personally beat the ever-living hell out of any pony who suggested he was ever not cut out for duty, even if it happens to be his mother. I quickly hoofed through my saddlebags, feeling another familiar suction against my hoof. I drew out the party cannon and looked it over quickly. The hairline split along its side, catching my attention, before the sound of dozens of hooves on the door pulled me back to the dire straits we were in. I really had hoped to save this one last shot for 42, but with her gone with the pool, there isn't going to be a better time to use this. I had to shout to get through to Brass, over the symphony of hooves beating on the walls. There was a loud groan at the door as the top left of it bent inwards. The screams and howl from outside, flooding through the hole louder than before. I raised my right hoof, lining the party cannon up with a failing door, the top corner bending a few more inches inward as they continued to slam at the container. Brass, when I fire, run out of here and don't look back. It's our only chance. I wasn't sure he had heard me over the noise, but he seemed more interested in the fact that one of the ghouls was trying to force its head in, the flesh on its face peeling back to the bone as it pressed its head in, its glowing blank eyes staring at us from the exposed sockets as it snapped its shredding muzzle at us. My ear flickered and perked up as I thought I could hear the rumble of thunder in the distance, but that was short-lived as the bolts holding the door groaned audibly over the shrieking mass outside. The roar of gunfire beat out the crowd as the bursts from battle rifle saddles punched through the hull of the sky carriage. One of the rounds bit into my flank hard, dropping to my hooves. Brass, get down! I screamed. Another set of shots punched through the side, one of them finding purchase in my shoulder. I screamed out and tensed up, causing my party cannon to go off. The spherical projectile replicated the effect of the door from the crashed craft yesterday, liberating the limbs from the feral ghouls who were unfortunate enough to be too close when it was flung away from the carriage. The world around me turned into wispy colors as I could feel blood oozing from the holes in my coat. The high-pitched reports of a Gauss rifle echoed loudly inside the metal container. I turned my head to look at Brass, who was lying next to me, looking just as drowsy as I was. He smiled as my world darkened, his bright eyes staring at me with his mouth moving, but his words took longer than they should have to reach my ears. It's going to be tough, Backlash, but you can't give up. His words accompanied my gaze as I swung it over, the sight of the ghouls by the door breaking off, and the wavy form of the marauder growing larger, meant we had made it. Backlash, you must remember, you can't blame yourself for what happened. And with that, everything ceased to be. The sensation of the cold stone floor was uncomfortable as I opened my eyes. I looked around to see that I was in the back of the garage. A soft light was emanating from upstairs as a shadow moved in front of it. As I tried to focus on it, I could start to make out a vaguely shaped pony. It was small, golden coat. Was it Brass? As he got closer, my mind kept insisting that something was wrong about all this, and I could feel that more than anything. He smiled as he trotted up beside me, then turned his gaze down, the sight of him making me want to gag. Nearly the entire left half of his face was just gone. Bits of bloody bone and viscera coated the inside of his head, and a worried look came over his remaining eye. Brass, what happened to your face? Are you all right? I yelled as I tried to get to my hooves, finding that I couldn't move at all. I'm fine, Backlash. He sounded beyond sad through the smile he forced. Look, I know I already said it, but I'm sorry about everything. When I saw what I had done to you back when we had just met up at the bunker, I decided that I couldn't be that pony anymore. I had run from my problems for long enough. Brass, why? Look, we need to get you a healing potion, or maybe some Hydra, I suggested nervously. I don't want to lose any more family members for this stupid quest, I said, pausing at the end. Why would I say that? I didn't consider Harmony a family member, or Peppermint for that matter. I let out a piercing scream as my head felt like it was tearing itself apart. I wanted to writhe or cringe or anything, but my body refused to cooperate. I know they may seem out of place right now, but you need to trust your instincts, Backlash. Brass said with something I was honestly glad to hear back in his voice. Hope. They will help you greatly in the weeks to come. He leaned down and gave me a soft kiss on the cheek, making me feel a soothing warmth that momentarily quelled all the pain in my head. Brass, come on, buddy. You're scaring me, I called out before another spike of pain racked my brain, bringing the agony back with a vengeance. I'm sorry you had to go through everything. He turned and trotted back towards the light in the kitchen, the light growing brighter the closer he got. But don't worry, Backlash. We will see each other again. He disappeared into the light, the brightness of it forcing me to close my eyes to escape it. I raised my hooves to my eyes reflexively as the light dimmed down again, the pain of the last few days returning all at once to me. Backlash! Longbow cried out from next to me, throwing her hooves painfully around my neck and pinning my legs to my head. Oh, goddesses, I was so worried about you! She leaned forward and gave me a quick kiss. I sat in shock as she stood up from me and hit me hard across the bandaged half of my face. What the hell were you thinking? Leaving with that monster? Were you out of your mind? I'm happy to see you too, I mumbled out as the pain in my head spiked as I felt the gears in it try to spin, feeling like they were still out of place, but still trying to help, forcing the words to form at my lips. How is Brass doing? Is he upstairs cooking again? Longbow took a step back with a grim look on her face. Celestia, you really don't remember. But I saw what... She said softly, looking at her expression, replaying her words in my head. She was showing true astonishment and sorrow. My thoughts were broken as the kitchen door swung open. Brass stood proudly at the top with a kitchen light shining brightly behind him. I laughed and scrambled to my hooves, running over to him as he reached the bottom of the stairs and embraced him tightly. You're all right! Longbow had me going there for a moment. I felt tears welling up in my eyes as overwhelming sadness took over. I was so happy to see him, but why did I feel so sad? You're the best friend a stallion could ever want, Brass. I was pushed back forcibly, blinking several times as I now looked on the face of a horrified Skyline. Tears were streaming down her muzzle, and looked like they had been for some time. But I don't understand. I looked around for Brass. Where did he go? Skyline wailed and took off up the stairs again, running into the waiting talons of Carlotta. She looked like she had been crying too. Longbow's hoof pressed against the good side of my muzzle as she turned my head towards her, the light from her horn flaring as she pressed it against my forehead. I was pulled into my own memory, feeling odd sitting inside my own mind, watching as Brass and I run for our lives across the pool bridge. The annoying feeling of deja vu hung over me as I had skidded to a stop and retrieved the bell box as I had done before. But as I looked up to see 42 wielding the hunting rifle, I noticed something I hadn't before. She barely had aimed it before I raised my hooves and waited for the shot. The rifle's report sounded the same that it had, but instead of me firing the bell when I opened my eyes, I lowered my hooves as my ears heard a thumping behind me. I turned slowly, looking back over my shoulder to see that Brass had dropped into the dirt. The left half of his head was just gone. His one good eye was frozen in a look of sheer terror as his blood dribbled down his lifeless muzzle. Brass was dead. He had been dead since 42 shot him at the pool. No, that's impossible! I shouted out as I shook my head hard, breaking the connection from Longbow. I looked up into her crying eyes as I felt my tears streaming down mine. He was right there with me the whole time. He and I made it to the sky carriage together. My legs buckled under me, and I collapsed to the floor. But she killed him? I broke down, sobbing on the cold concrete floor as Longbow cried with me. I'm sorry, Backlash. Longbow sniffled and brushed her hoof across the melted remains of my own. When I found you, you were barely alive in that wreck. After we stabilized you with potions, we drove back to Red Wing. I was only half listening as my mind ran through everything that I had done with Brass. I had unfairly stolen him away from the Rangers. I had gotten him involved with 42. I had gotten him turned into a ghoul. And now, I had gotten him killed. When the townsponies told us that you had left with Brass for the pool, and we didn't find you with him, I used my memory spell again. She continued, sounding guilty about it. I had thought that we might have learned about where Brass was, but when I saw that, she leaned down and pressed her forehead against mine. Your mind must have created a block to keep you from completely breaking down right there. I'm so sorry. Her words drove another spike into my heart as I wailed out again. I had stolen his life. It hadn't been mine to take, but I used him like it was. Once again ignorant of the consequences of my actions. If I hadn't stopped, if I just hadn't had the fucking idea that she deserved to die then and there, he'd still be alive. Even as Longbow curled up next to me, holding me tightly, I couldn't stop crying. I cried until my stomach hurt, until my head throbbed, but nothing could make me stop. Not even when I ran out of tears did I stop. I just wailed and pressed my muzzle to Longbow's neck, finally, at some point, passing out in her warm embrace. And when I awoke on my mattress next to her, I couldn't help but continue. It didn't matter how long I sat there, or if Sherbert was going to destroy the wasteland. All I could think was that I had led the only friend that I had ever known to his death. I hadn't deserved to have been rescued, and should have only been left in that sky carriage to rot with the dead that had attacked me. Hours passed as I laid there, only finally looking up when Dr. Fitz came to check on my injuries. It's time to change those bandages, Backlash, he said as he put his hoof onto them. I twisted away and knocked his hoof away. No, I want these injuries to stay. I snapped at him, glaring with my one good eye. Brass died because of my failing. I need to suffer for what I've done. Dr. Fitz rolls his eyes and shook his head, instantly bringing all of my rage to the surface. No, if you don't change these, you'll get an infection that could... I pushed myself to my hooves as he spoke, spinning and hooking around his neck with my foreleg and slamming against my tool shelves. They crashed over as he fell into them, staring at me with fear in his eyes. Could what? Kill me? I screamed out. The kitchen door flew open as I heard a flutter of wings, not even having enough time to shift my gaze before Skyline smashed into me. She took me down and pinned me to the floor, with a seething hatred burning in her eyes. You stupid, fucking asshole! She spit as she yelled down at me. The agony of her hooves gave me as they pressed into my burns was too much as I whimpered. Brass dying was your fault! Her own tears streamed down into my chest as her anger only grew. You shouldn't have taken him back there, Backlash. After all he'd been through, how could you do that to him? Don't you know that I know that? I choked out. That's why I need to hurt. That's why... Skyline hit me across the muzzle as hard as she could. Brass is dead, thanks to you. And all you want to do is get yourself killed? She swung with her other hoof. You don't get to die! She continued slamming her hooves into me again and again, while I didn't even have the will to flinch anymore. You get to live with it, Backlash, for the rest of your fucking life! Carlotta stepped forward and tore her off me, looking down at me with an emotionless gaze before turning and talking Skyline back upstairs. I lay there with my head pounding as Longbow stepped up next to me. "Why don't you come with me?" she said softly, as she held out her hoof to me. "I know that you don't want to, but you need to. At least, so you can say goodbye." She gave me a soft smile as I nodded slowly, and took her hoof. I walked slowly behind her, and she led me out of the garage, the soft patter of the freezing rain greeting me as the dark of night surrounded us. I followed in a daze while her horn glowed, turning as she led me up the street, letting the way as the strong wind whipped against us, each step getting heavier in my mind as she led me along, knowing where we were going. We had turned past the wrought iron gates of the old War Memorial Park up the street from the garage, and we were slowly making our way towards the small hill that was in the center. I stopped when Longbow's light outlined the dead tree that stood in front of it. It was the same one from my dreams with Pinky. How had I not recognized it before when Sky and I had walked past it 1,000 times? My legs shook as I forced them to move closer. The urge to break down again was welling up inside of me. "Celestia and Luna," Longbow said sadly as she sat down, lowering her head. "I pray that you find it in your hearts to help the soul of Brass Tacks find peace with you. Please guide him safely to the everlasting meadows of the afterlife." I stepped up next to Longbow and lay down next to the full-sized mound of loose dirt under the dead tree, the final resting place of a friend lost too soon. Looking up at the base of the tree and running my hoof slowly along the letters that had been carved into it, I could only muster a whimper as I forced myself to speak anything at all. Goodbye, Brass. Level up. Battle saddles +7. Medicine +8. Quest perk, Martyr. The entirety of the wasteland knows what your struggle has cost you, and now has a rallying cry to avenge their fallen heroes. Random ponies will now show up at your side sometimes to aid you in fights. New perk, All Bucked Up, Rank 2. You are a walking tank, as you have managed to survive everything your enemies can put you through. You now gain the pain-dulling properties of Med-X when you are under 25% health, on top of the previous effect.